أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Welcome to On the Couch with me, Farida Rabi and Soki and Zunzi. This is where you hear the difference on 100.4 FM. On the Couch, together with Lately in Land, Housing is a weekly show that discusses current affairs in political landscape pertaining to housing, from evictions, equitable access to land, and 10-year security. Today, we continue the conversation around the waiting list, also known as Housing Needs Register. We speak to Daniel Lowe, attorney at Difuna Ukwazi, and Kenneth Matlawe. Is that correct, sir? Matlawe, and Kashifa Ahmed from Housing Assembly. Good evening, guys, and welcome to On the Couch.
Good evening. Thanks for having us.
Ms. Kashifa, you're quiet. Mr. Matlawe, I can't hear you. You good?
Very good.
Okay, cool.
Yes, sir.
So, as I said off air, this is my second conversation talking about housing. Now, the first question we'd like to speak or unpack about is the city of Cape Town enabling the housing queue or jumping the queue?
Yes. Through our findings and through us working on the ground, we found that this is actually something that is on the part of the city of Cape Town. And for the most part, the thing of jumping the queue, jumping the waiting list is mostly an argument of the government towards communities. It's not a community to community argument. It's them saying that we are jumping the queue by protesting, by occupying, and so on. But through our grassroots findings, through our work, we can see that actually it's their processes and how they are operating that makes queue jumping actually possible.
On the 26th of April, it's something that I wanted to touch on last week, but we couldn't. The Abahlali base in Umjodolo in Durban held this Unfreedom Day to coincide with the National Freedom Day. This is to state that the poor is still in this very poor state in terms of housing. Now, when we think about housing and land, how do we compare the situation we have here in Cape Town? Ms. Kashifa?
I think, if you compare housing and land, we are still where we were, because a lot of people are still struggling, because we're seeing we have a lot of backyarders, we have a lot of overcrowding households, so there's not enough houses that's been built for our community, because you will find so many people will occupy spaces, because we stay 2 to 3 generations in one house. And now going to occupy pieces of land, that is in the alternative that people have, because the city is not providing enough houses. And what you also see is, job losses, people is unemployed. And we see so many people is also in debt. So they can't even afford to do that. So it's just housing and land. It's still a big crisis in Cape Town. So we are still struggling with that.
I'm interested to know about I heard an interview this morning which I thought was really powerful. It was on Al Jazeera, and it was speaking about these two architects and how architects contribute to society in terms of building and structure and housing. And the one architect is from Chile, and he said that one of the constitutions that they used was the South African constitution, because it was a positive constitution that spoke about, everyone is equal for housing. It's your right to have housing. So with that interesting conversation and this positive constitution that we have, how come then we still have this struggle?
Can I?
Yes, please.
So I think first we need to put it in a broader context, right? In South Africa, pre-1994, we know, apartheid, spatial inequalities, separate development. Come 1994, there's a whole backlog of homelessness and people without land, people without housing. And then the newly established, this new constitution, it comes with, this framework called, GEAR, right? The growth, economic and redistribution, which is essentially neoliberal, right? It's in favor mostly of profit, of big businesses making profit rather than, building essential or social amenities for communities. So now what you find today is that, yes, there is freedom, but the very people of the majority of South Africans, the poverty-stricken households, cannot really enjoy the privileges of that freedom because we do not have access to the basic necessities, access to land, access to housing. And this, for me, also puts that difference between, for example, in Durban and in Cape Town. In Durban, it's not as unequally or spatially unequally built like in Cape Town. In Cape Town, we have highways, we have railway lines that are separating different ethnic groups. If you look at Langa and Bonteheuwel, if you look at Gugulethu and Heideveld, there are these barriers between communities that are dividing communities. So based on that, communities cannot interact with each other, and also they cannot then talk of this rainbow nation, this positive constitution that the world they applaud us for it, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, I think just to build on what Kenneth is saying, part of it also is how we view land. So in this neoliberal framework that we've adopted, we see land as a commodity. We see it as something that is devoid of life. We see it as just a thing that we can trade with, that we can make money on, that we can speculate with. So the social value of land hasn't been prioritized. And at Ndufunu-Kwazi, we've been emphatic in our calls to ensure that the social value of land can be placed back into the center of the conversation of land. Because if you think about the social value, you'll think about, okay, so how do people interact with land? How do people interact? Okay, we build houses, but we build more than houses. We build our lives. We live, we learn, and we play where we live. So it's not just something to make money with, land.
But on you're speaking about land. If you also see what the city is currently doing, also where they want to build these houses, also for our community. It's on the outskirts of Cape Town. So when you stay on the outskirts of Cape Town, it's also the amenities goes with it. So if there's no schools and there's no parks and clinics and things like that, they place people so far out of the city. People move back to where they came from because what they have there, it's, our people are hustling all the time. So if there's nothing there, and the city's not putting things there for them, they will move back to where they came from. So it should also be a space where people can, like you were saying, can play and have all these things for them to have, can say, I'm staying in a decent house because I have all these things that surround me to make my life better for my children as well.
Convenience.
Just to add also on that, and on, it's one thing to have a very good policy or a very good constitution, but it's another thing if there is no implementation of that. And going then directly to the point of why we're here today, the waiting list then becomes a perfect example of that. That they're saying here is people must come and register to be on the database for a house, and then based on that they will look within their resources and provide housing. But then you find the way we as people understand the waiting list for what it is, it's not what we understand it to be, right? We believe that, the waiting list is not just a list of names, right? The moment I put my name there, I'm waiting for something, almost that entitlement to then receive, But on the part of the state, for them, the waiting list is just someone coming to say, I'm in need of a house. There is no guarantee of a house. So then it's beautifully written that, our allocation framework, our housing code, the national one, it's beautifully written, but then the implementation thereof is very marginalizing to other communities. Because, for example, we found that the 80-20% principle, that for every housing project, 80% of the beneficiaries of that project must be taken from the area where that housing project is built in, and then 20% must come from outside towards integration. But now we found that in Nyanga, for example, 10% of the people that were in a housing project in Nyanga, 10% of the beneficiaries there were never even on the waiting list to begin with. We found that in Grassy Park, in a housing project in Grassy Park, for example, that 99% only came from Grassy Park, and there was no integration whatsoever. So then on paper, it sounds very good, you know, that there's integration, there's what, but then in reality, this is not what is happening. Yeah.
So how do we change the reality of this for people? Because you speak about social value and that land is not a commodity. And then, of course, the Housing Assembly and this campaign. How do you change this narrative? Because maybe it is a commodity. Maybe there's not really much to land per se, because if I'm not entitled to what is promised to me in the Constitution, then I'm waiting, and I'm not really waiting. Is it really mine?
But I think transparency is one of the things that is problematic, because there's no transparency when there's a new development happening. Because what we see with the new development, you have a steering committee also overseeing. So the cities, they say they're involved with this also. But there's a steering committee that oversee the project, obviously with the developers and that. But it's also corruption also that it's also playing out there. So what we find in some of these developments is also people it's not considered also. So when there's new developments happening, there should be a list. It should be all over. People should know. And there should also be something like, these are the people that is still on the waiting list. It's like we can't find them. Maybe there will be someone who will find them or knows those people. Yeah. But you don't get those things where it's open and transparent so people can see. It's like it's a secret also. So when people go to this development and to this steering committee, sometimes they give people a hard time. Yes, people, sometimes people will also react to that because they are frustrated. So they don't understand always what is happening because you are waiting so long. We have a gentleman that is 37 years on the waiting list. And now where he's working, the employer is also selling the place where he stays. He's working in service. So because he had 6 brothers staying with mom, and now you can imagine it's overcrowded. So he had to move out with his two children. So now when his employer is selling that flat, which he stayed also for 37 years. He's going to be homeless within the next 3 months. So going to the city all the time also, it's like, no, you must wait, we're working with what list now? When you say, I'm coming here just to check, now he's 85, so which year are you working on? Because that is what people get every time when they go to the city, to do the check on the house. Oh, how long am I still on this list? When am I getting a house? It's just a pattern every time. And you know what? People is frustrated because they are saying also we get attitude from these ones when we do question these things. So accountability is also the other thing that is not happening, because when these projects, the city don't even do follow-ups on these things. You will see projects are stopped. Now who's accountable for these things? That's why our people must wait, because now we need to wait till these tenders and things is going to be fixed. And we don't want that anymore. We want the city to be accountable for these things, and we want the city also, they need to see that transparency is happening in the communities. Because at the moment, that's why we are sitting with this thing, with this long waiting list.
Honestly, it's the best policy. I do believe that you guys might have a few comments to make, but we just need to take a short break. This is On the Couch on 100.4 FM, and we're speaking about the waiting list and the social movement Housing Assembly campaign. We continue this conversation right after this. Radio 786, where you hear the where you hear the difference, together with Lately in Land and Housing, which is a weekly show that discusses current affairs and political landscape pertaining to housing. In studio, we have Daniel Lowe, attorney at Difuna Ukwazi, Kenneth Matlawe, and Kashfa Ahmed from Housing Assembly. Before the break, there's a few questions that came in and a comment came in, and it has to do with integration. This listener is saying, Assalamu alaikum. In terms of integration, it seems like I hate defining people by the color of their skin.
Oh, that is there.
So this listener is saying that the integration won't really work because one particular race group doesn't want to integrate with the other. Do you find that might be the case? That maybe in Grassy Park you find that there's all the residents there is only 99% Grassy Park people, and then hence the 1% is nowhere, and then in Langa you find maybe the 10%.
I mean, as I was saying, that Cape Town is highly divided, based on racial and ethnic lines. So of course these considerations come in when housing is built, right? But we should also not talk of these communities today, in today's time, as if there is no different races and different ethnic groups living in one area. For example, Menenberg, we know historically it's a colored area. But when today it's not like it was in the 1950s, for example. Today it's very much integrated. There are, black people also amongst, there's Tambo Square, which is right in the center of Heideveld, so of Menenberg. So we shouldn't talk of them as if, it's still back in the apartheid years. But yes, they consider the cultural considerations are everywhere, right? Because people come from different cultural, political, and social spaces and places in South Africa. So that becomes an issue. But with this concept of, a democratic South Africa, a rainbow nation, this is exactly the type of things that we are trying to redress, to undo the idea that, only colored people must live together and only blacks must live together and only those. We are trying to undo these things. That's why principles of integration, so that, to bring that multiculturalism out in our communities.
Our lines are open 0786 10 11 12, or you can call us on 021 699 1786. In terms, I appreciate your comment, because I think integration is a big conversation to have, especially in a city like Cape Town, where the division is very clear. But
can I just say something on that also?
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to the city also with this integration, when houses are built, it's also, the city is also causing this, because they were built in Mitchell's Plain, and then Mitchell's Plain will say, but it's just for the blacks will say it's just for the colors, and the colors is just for, we have also that in fights within communities also. And it shouldn't be like that, because, when we are building, we are all people. There's no color to this. So that's why as an organization, as Housing Assembly, we do the cross-border workshops with different communities, and that brings also the different types of communities together, because then we see also, but your struggle is the same like mine. So we need to speak about these things, because it's like that divide and rule. That is what the city is currently doing when they do these projects, because then it's also said, no, but it's just for this group, and it's just for, and we don't want that situation.
Ms. Kashfa, seeing that we're on the Housing Assembly, just speak to us about the work that you guys do. You mentioned the workshop, but expand.
Oh, yeah, we are an organization that works in different communities. As we are in 7 districts, but it's 21 areas that we are working in. So as an organization, we work with different types of housing struggles, and as an organization, we bring communities together. So it's people living in backyards, the informal settlement, the RDPs, the TRAs. So it's different types of housing. We're not just working with the rental stock. So all these different housing types have different issues. So now that we talk about the waiting list, and that is one of the things that came up from communities that we are working with. So as an organization, we are on the ground because we work with these communities. It's problem with the different housing, but it's not just housing. It's water, electricity, it's services. We face gender-based violence. You have the social ills within communities. So electricity, especially now with load shedding, that is one of the main things that our community are struggling with because of the violence and the gangsterism that is in communities. So we are faced with a lot of things. So as Housing Assembly, the campaign that we took up now is this waiting list, because we can see our elders are dying, and it seems like nobody's really caring about this thing of this waiting list. And we've also seen when my parents die, the children can't benefit the house. So we have to fight also for that also. So one family received now a house, but how many families out there didn't receive their mother or their father's house when he passed on? So those are the things that we as an organization are working with. And we do have a women's collective and a youth collectives, because we're also seeing our youth is falling on the wayside also. So, yeah, that is our organization in a nutshell, but there's more to it.
Yeah, no, just to add, I think also, you've covered what we do as an organization as a whole. And me, I just wanted to highlight specifically on the waiting list campaign that is currently happening. Because we are fighting for housing, but we are fighting for housing in different streams and different campaigns. We have an anti-eviction campaign, we have the waiting list campaign, and we have our quality services campaign. So we are fighting in different streams to get, social change to communities. But the waiting list program and the waiting list campaign especially came out of communities, because always communities, when they occupy or when they struggle, they will tell you that we are doing this because we've been on the waiting list for so many years. And sometimes when you challenge and question the city of Cape Town, they will also give the same response that, no, but why can't you guys just wait because your names are on a database or something like that. So based on that, then Housing Assembly, we jointly with LRC, we did a PAIA application, a public access to information application to the city of Cape Town, asking for a waiting list. That can you give us a waiting list for a particular project in Manenberg? But then they responded by saying that they cannot give us the list. One, because it's people's private information. So because of the POPI Act, they cannot, give private information to a public organization. But also, secondly, they said they can't give us the list because people are registering daily on the list. So it's an ever-changing list. So whatever they print out might not be a true reflection of the list as it is. So then we said, okay, if that is, if you can't give us the list, then give us a list of completed, incomplete, and future housing projects. And it's in that information then that we found there's some inconsistencies in the application of number one, the allocation framework, the 80-20 principle. There's also been what we feel marginalization of people who've been on the list for a long time, because when a housing project is built, for example, in Manenberg, one of the housing projects, 2006 was the cut-off date. So 2006 upwards, people who registered on the waiting list from 2006 onwards are then considered to be on that housing project. But now we found there are people who've been on the list since 1993, since 1997, since 1999. So if the cutoff is 2006 and I've been on the list since 92, I'm clearly being marginalized. And also the fact that some people are beneficiaries when they were never even on the list to begin with, while there are people waiting for 25, for 30 years. So we found these things then through this information that we got through that application with LRC. And this is why our campaign, we are saying first, we don't want to fight we first want to do research. We want to organize communities. We want to go into communities. We want to take this information to communities. Say, let's organize ourselves. Let's build counter information to challenge these arguments and positions of the city of Cape Town when it comes to their excuses that they are making. So let's build that counter information so that then that question that we were talking about of the difference of the social application of land will then become a discussion only when the beneficiaries themselves are part of the process from beginning until end, because there's no way you're going to build a house but yet you do not involve the people who are supposed to be the beneficiaries in every step of the way. But
and just to say, there's obligations on the city to do it as the local government. So the Municipal Systems Act does say that public participation is imperative in all the stages of any sort of development that wants to take place. So the planning stage, and the execution stage. So it's not a nice to have, for communities not to form part of their own developments. It is actually it's an obligation. So that is something that we see the city really struggling with, is actually having effective public participation with its communities. Often it's a very top-down process. It's not a grassroots process. It's usually almost like a rubber stamp or a tick box that they do. But actually what Kenneth is saying here is that we need the proper involvement of the people affected.
Can I just say something also on this waiting list? The city, they also flout their own policies and procedures that is there with housing. You will also find that people is renting also their houses out, and some are selling also their houses. So selling a RDP house, you haven't even moved in. You have someone who was renting the place from you. You have these things that's happening, and that came out of the research that we've also done. So how do you rent a place? Then that means that you don't need a house. So if you even sell a house, you don't need a house. And you can see some of our community is so vulnerable. Some, it's also a social problem that we have in communities. Some have houses, but there's no food in the house. There's no electricity in the house. So our social development also needs to come on board on these things, because some households don't even have something to eat. So it becomes also a problem where people find a quick way out to do these things, selling these things or rent the house out. So, there should be more involvement of the city, social development, whoever needs to come on board to address this problem on this.
Yeah, it's like interdepartmental coordination. Yeah. So we know the city is notorious for having extremely bad relationships between and cross departments. One of the examples is that the current City of Cape Town budget, which shows the amount of money that is being spent on safety and security measures. So instead of spending their money on housing and on social development, by far what they're spending on is safety and security. And part of that is also maintaining security for certain empty plots of land. So what they're doing is that instead of actually building the houses for the people and developing projects on the land, they are now posting law enforcement to ensure that no one else comes onto the land. If there are already people, they're putting law enforcement there to say, okay, no more. So we're seeing the prioritization of certain things that our communities need, such as these social development services, not taking place, but that things like policing are taking most of the budget.
There's a few comments that came in. This one comment says, I went for a housing subsidy in April. I'm a backyard dweller. Was said I must be on the list for a year at least. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Another comment says, Salam, the restoration at District 6 Haven even take place yet, and you have people on the waiting list for ages, and people come in from nowhere and get houses. And then this one says, things have not changed in Parkwood. People is not even on the waiting list. Sitting in a house, people living in crowded places or crowded homes. When there's housing projects, it's like there's only certain people that can get or is informed about these housing projects. So we need to unite when it comes to housing and educate our people. This one says, Assalamu alaikum. The waiting list is really the waiting list is really false here in Lavender Hill. Houses are standing empty for 1 to 2 years. I'm 63 years old, 17 years on the waiting list. Went to inquire, was told that they are busy with 1991. But I want to know how people younger than me get homes. They also get suggested a old age home. Shukran. So there's a lot of concerns around the waiting list, and I did want to ask the question around the criteria, and just to read it in terms of Cape Town's selection criteria detailed in the Housing Allocation Policy of 2015, which is currently being updated. Qualifying applicants will be selected according to their date of application on the housing database. So this means when you registered, it matters. So we're supposed to start from the time you got it, right? So there's not supposed to be a waiting list. I don't have time, guys. We have to conclude shortly. So if we can get closing comments, please.
Just one from me. I think just to close or to conclude. I mean, so many issues on the waiting list come up, right? I think one thing that sometimes is we often forget and do not highlight is the fact that also the municipalities and the city of Cape Town, they are signing off and approving on built housing projects. But yet you'll find the workmanship is of a very, very low standard. Some of the homes are built without events. They are built where, the ceilings are falling off, the doors are squeaky, things like that. So sometimes we don't, we have the house, but then people end up with misery. People are happy that, finally I've been waiting for 25 years and now I have a house, but only to find misery in the house because now when you sweep the floor away. So this is an ongoing struggle. And even the comments, they just remind me of the everyday engagements in communities. This is what people are saying everywhere on the ground. But I'm going to close it off there.
Maybe I can just say that in closing, we are currently busy collecting client copies of communities. So we have quite a lot already. So we want to spread it all out in all the areas that people must bring their client copy, so we can just gather that information also. And like Kenneth was saying, let's build our own resource and take it back to the city, because that is what LRC currently need, is that information from communities, that client copies, people who's on the waiting list from 1980 till 2006. So that will benefit us now at the moment, so we can have that information and send to them, because there's no way that we can allow that cities doing this, especially because if you look at this is mostly our elders that is suffering. So let's take up the struggle within our different communities and take this forward. They can contact us at Housing Assembly. Maybe we can just leave our contact details here, and then communities can contact us, and then just take the photo and send us via WhatsApp that client copy. That will help.
You make it so easy, they must just send a photo. Jeez, like imagine making a copy and you don't even have the means to make a copy. You don't know how to.
Yeah, but you know what? They can go to the rent office and get that client copy, because that is why we encourage people, because the rent office know now people are coming for the client copies. And what we also see what the city is doing, when I'm 20 years on the waiting list, they bring my years down to 15 or so. So we encourage people also to keep that copies, so we gather those things together. So it's important. Fetch at the rent office, take a photo, and we have this mobile phones, take a copy and then just send it to us, a photo.
Another comment came saying, "Hi, good evening. My name is Ricardo. I I applied in 1999 for a house. Another one says, Salam, I think it's very unfair when people come from different provinces and they are not even on the waiting list. They protest and they get a house built for them when there is 20 years of people waiting on the waiting list and they don't even get houses. I think that's for a separate conversation. I'd like to unpack that, what that means for people in the Western Cape or Cape Town in particular.
But can I tell you something? There's people in the other provinces that is also contacting us regarding the waiting list because they also have the same thing that side. So it's not just a Western Cape. Maybe a Western Cape is just worse. But other provinces also have the same thing of the waiting list.
I think something to also note, but also to be, I think, suspicious of is that there is a complaint mechanism that the city has established for if you are if your argument is that you have not been included in a particular housing project. So you are able to send a complaint if you can prove that due process wasn't followed and that you have been registered on the list for whenever the year was. So you can appeal something like that, and you can appeal it to the city manager. But again, I say it's something for us to just, also treat with suspicion, I guess, because if the city has to, in this case now, hold itself to account. So we've seen in instances where the city has to hold itself to account. We wait for the outcomes of investigations and, So in that case, I will encourage the listeners to support the Housing Assemblies campaign because as we've said tonight, if we are standing together and we don't let these divide and conquer tactics work, then we can be a force to be reckoned with and change things here.
One last comment before we close completely. Salam, I applied in 1989. I got nothing. When I went to the local CECT, they told me that I must go to town. I'm 61 years old, but people that's not long are moving into houses. And she says her name is Zainab.
Can I just say something? You know what, in that new development where we were, the people that's working on the project, they even get into these houses with their children. That's why our communities that's 1980s and 90s is not on the list, because some of these steering committee members are also beneficiaries of these things and there's no accountability on this. And these are the things that we've complained to the city already. So they know about these things, It's also we're turning a blind eye to some of these things that's currently happening.
I want to thank you, Danielle, Ms. Kashifa, Kenneth. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. Until we chat next week. That was Danielle Lowe, Kashifa, and Kenneth speaking to us about the housing issue, the waiting list. If you need more information about the housing issue or you need some help, you can find them on, at least in Ndifuna Ukwazi on Facebook and Twitter, or on their website that's www.nu.org.za. And if you want the Housing Assembly's number, you can contact us on 021 699 1786. House and Home is up next with Reflections. So much more on Radio 786 100.4 FM. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Hear the difference. Radio 786.